Welcome to Bring the World Home, a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. My name is Chip Tilton. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia from 1966 to 1968, and I will be your host for today's program. In this program, we will be sharing with you one Peace Corps volunteer's experiences from abroad. Hopefully our messages of friendship and family with peoples of all countries and cultures is exhibited in each of our shows. With us today is Jim Carr, who served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Samoa from 1973 to 1975, and in the Solomon Islands from 1975 to 1977. Welcome, Jim. Glad you could join us today.
Thanks a lot.
We're into a number of different shows here. I think this is about the 20th program that the Hawaii RPCVs have put on. We've gone all around the world, not covered all of the countries that Peace Corps serves in, but this is our first program with a volunteer that has been in the Solomons, and so we're going to focus on that in our conversation today. We're over here out in the Central Pacific. Solomon Islands is down close to New Guinea, and New Zealand, I guess, is relatively close to you.
I always tell people when they ask about it, go to Australia, go north, hang a right instead of a left. If you go left, you go to New Guinea. If you hang a right, you go to the Solomons.
Okay.
Easy way for them to figure it out.
Well, it's an interesting transition from to go from being an American citizen in the comfort of the United States to a place such as Samoa or the Solomon Islands. You served there about 30 years or so ago. You obviously must have been a young man. What was your impetus to get into the Peace Corps? How did you first hear about the Peace Corps?
Well, my wanting to go to the Pacific started off with an old TV program called Adventures in Paradise.
Oh, sure.
And Gardner McKay, who was from Hawaii, was Captain
that beautiful
Avatroy.
sloop all.
Oh yeah, and every week he'd go to a different little island and have all these adventures. So I was always interested in the Pacific. And then the first president that I ever remember was President Kennedy.
Yes.
And he came up with this very idealistic, that ask not what you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you. And you owe something to other people. So that was, I really wanted to do it. And then Cat Stevens came up with his song, Peace Train. And, so all through my life, there was this reinforcements. So finally, when I got out of college, I'd been thinking that I wanted to do it since probably about 7th grade when Kennedy first brought it up, and got out of college, and then I had my chance and filled out an application, and I didn't know where they were going to send me, and all of a sudden I wound up in the Pacific.
Okay. So that wasn't your designated or requested destination as a potential Peace Corps volunteer?
Well, back when I did it, and I don't know how they do it now, they kind of had you fill out, name your 3 jobs that you really wanted to do, kind of like a dream sheet.
Yes.
And then name the 3 places you'd like to be, and then they would put it into some computer, and some country, someplace had asked for a mechanic or an engineer or an electrician or a science teacher, and they would try and match these up.
Right.
I just graduated with a degree in microbiology, so I wanted to do something about fighting diseases, malaria eradication, tuberculosis, any other type of disease. Okay, that's my jobs that I wanted. The other side was, well, where do you want to be? Well, tropics is probably where there's going to be the most diseases.
Right.
Probably Antarctic would be the least likely. So, my dream sheet, the computer spit out, oh, we need somebody in the South Pacific. I didn't know that if you said, no, I don't want to do that, that maybe, next week or week later, you might get another job. This was just the first one the computer kicked out. So I went, okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
I've been happy
And that was
about
to
it.
Samoa?
That was to Samoa when they first sent me there.
We had a conversation earlier, and you had told me that after your service in Samoa, you were still very much interested in Peace Corps service. So that brought you to the next phase. You, as many volunteers do, have such a great time. They want to do it some more after the initial 2-year stint is up. So you put in a request for another assignment.
Yeah.
And it came up the Solomons.
Yes. In Samoa, I had taught in a school, I'd lived in a small village. I'd stayed in one place. I knew one place very well. When I went to Samoa, I went with 35 people. 11 of them stayed to completion, and 10 of the 11 extended or asked for another tour. I was just one of those. Then all of a sudden, they offered me this job where you're not going to be in one place. Your job is basically going to be to map an island, map a district, which was mainly one big island and a few small little ones on it.
Okay, we have a map that shows the layout. And what island did you end up going to initially?
Okay, I was in charge of Malaita District, which was one of the 4 districts in the Solomon Islands at that time. It consisted of mainly Malaita, which is Big Malaita and Small Malaita, Dai Island, Anton Java, which is supposed to be the world's largest atoll in the South Pacific, and Sitcayana, which actually belonged to Hawaii at one time, supposedly, according to Rascals in Paradise by Day and McGar and what is it? Can't remember the other author's name. Day is a local guy, so remember him.
And just to clarify, when you say I was in charge of this district, you don't mean in a political sense or a authoritative sense, but what? Or am I wrong?
No. Actually, the job that I was brought over for is the Solomon Islands was moving towards independence. And
from Britain at that time.
From Great Britain. It was a British Solomon Islands protectorate.
Since the 1890s or thereabouts.
Yeah. Actually, the British took it over as a protectorate to stop the blackbirding that had been taking place there.
What's blackbirding?
Blackbirding is when traders would come to islands and they would basically either hire people to steal people or steal people themselves to take them and sell them as labor, either to a lot of the Solomon Islanders were taken down to Queensland to the sugar plantations. Okay. Some were taken to Fiji and to Samoa even had some.
Blackbirding just being then a euphemism for slave trade, basically.
Well, but there,
not quite as evil as that.
Well, yeah, it was called labor recruiting, and there were some fairly good labor recruiters, and there were some that were terribly, they were slavers, and there was always this question of which was who. But so the British had been there for all this time, and now the Solomon Islands was going to get independence.
And did the Solomonese,
Solomon Islanders,
Solomon Island people desire independence? It was their idea. Britain wanted to decentralize their colonies. How did that movement take hold?
Well, there's probably a number of factors. There were some Solomon Islanders that wanted independence. A vast majority of the Solomon Islands, the vast majority of the people on Malaita, the main island I was on, probably didn't even know that they were a British protectorate that much. Okay, so it wasn't going to make a big deal of difference to them. I think for Britain's point of view that the Solomon Islands was costing them money every year, and they would kind of like to get rid of it. And so that there were the 3 different reasons that it came across. But what the British decided to do was, based on the population of the country, the British would then give aid after independence to the Solomon Islands. Now, before, nobody in the Solomon Islands had really worried about the population of the country. You were worried about who contributed to the economic life of the colony. And that was very few people that lived right around the coast on most islands, not the people that lived up in the middle bush and the hills. And so they really had no idea who was up there. For the first time, it became important to count them, because that's where the aid was going to be based on.
So by enumerating the population, this so far basically unseen population, then that would enhance the aid coming from Britain to flowing to the Solomon Island new government, new authorities.
Right.
And so it occurs to me, if Britain was desired this information, this data, why did they hire or why did they want an American citizen to conduct the census taking?
Nobody has ever come out and honestly told me. Now I have 2 theories. One of them is that, hey, we're cheap. We can get some Peace Corps volunteers to do it for free. It's not going to cost us anything. The other thing, maybe less skeptical, is that, the Peace Corps had no sway one way or the other. We didn't count. We didn't care if we counted millions or hundreds of thousands. It wasn't for us. So we were considered neutral, maybe.
Sure.
You know. So anyway, they brought one Peace Corps volunteer to be the census superintendent for each one of the 4 districts.
Mm-hmm. And so when you said earlier that you were in charge of Malaita, the island of Malaita, I guess that's what you mean.
Yeah.
And so most Americans have probably heard of the Solomons by virtue of World War II, the bitter fighting that took place on Guadalcanal near the end of the war in the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And maybe a lot of us have seen some of the images from Army films, military films of the era, and have heard other stories about the nature of the people of the area. When you arrived in country in 75, how did you find the people?
Well, when I got there,
that you work with?
Yeah, when I got there in 75, okay, the first thing you do is they take you for training, and I was on Guadalcanal, you know, the main island that most people have heard about. And when you talk about seeing war relics, you go along the coast, you see all the ships that were sunk along there. You go in the bush and you run into military equipment that was left there rotting. The Solomons, most of the people are extremely friendly and really nice people. I really like them. Everybody was telling all of the Solomon Islanders talking about, oh, but you got to look out for those guys from Malaita. They're wild. They're just extremely wild. You know, don't look at a Malaitan wrong because he'll cut your head off. I mean, they're, you know, the Malaitans were the boogeymen of the Solomon Islands. And so when you're sitting there in training and you're deciding where you're going to go and they have these 4 districts and 4 guys they're going to pick, I thought, gee, that sounds great. I'll pick that one. You know?
Let's go where the most adventure is likely.
Let's go up there where people will chop your head off for no reason or something. Man, I got there and those guys were really nice. I never had any problem when I was there. But the difference when you got there was that if you got to a village, there might be a few people that spoke English, depending on how far away from the coast you went. The further you got inland, the less people would speak English. On the island of Malaita, there are 12 separate languages, mutually unintelligible languages. Now, Malaita is about, I'm guessing, about the size of Oahu, maybe a little bit bigger. There's 12 separate languages that can't understand each other spread around the island.
That's very interesting that such close quarters and the language would develop, obviously, over the generations into such diverse language that's not readily understood by the next closest group. Yeah,
and part of this you'd have to understand is because people didn't leave home. You know, there was no need for MasterCard or whatever it is, don't leave home without it, because people didn't. I mean, you lived in small hamlets. You didn't even live in villages unless you were one of the Christian people that lived around the coastline. You lived in small hamlets, which may be your family, maybe your mom and dad, you know, and your kids, because they had their customary beliefs. And this is the part where there are a lot of taboos in the country. And if you violate a taboo, very bad things can happen to you. Now, they would say they're devil, but it's not like it sounds. I mean, it's like
not our Western.
Not our Western version of what a devil is. You know, I mean, it's a really. But so if I have my family here, I don't want to live right next door to your family because I can make my wife and my family maintain all the taboos. But I'm not too sure about you. And if your family screws up and breaks one of the taboo, I might, you know, my family might just be collateral damage when you get zapped. And so we tended to, you know, all these places stayed apart in little hamlets. That was part of what made my job kind of hard because you couldn't go in to find a village of 500 people. You found at most a village of 10 or 15 people. So they were spread out all over and you had to hike around through valleys and ridges and stuff like that and map them.
And so what you're saying wasn't a village, it was more of a family habitat. Here and another one there and another one there and spread out. And then what I heard you say earlier is that the people of the central highlands area, the inland area, were remote in contact from the coastal people. It's not like say in Hawaiian culture here in the pre-contact era, where a group, there were people that lived inland and there were people who lived on the coast, and they relied on each other for the totality of their lifestyle.
Yeah, it wasn't really like that. Each unit was almost completely independent on its own. Now, there were a few things, like in the north, there was some of the custom money they had. One of them was dolphin teeth. They would have these big dolphin hunts and they'd collect the teeth. And that was like the custom money. You needed that to buy a bride. When the saltwater people would go on these dolphin hunts, there was usually one tribe that did that, one group that did that. People from the bush would feed them in return for the meat from the dolphins. And that would be the one time a year they get meat. So there was some sort of interaction back and forth. And once in a while there were small markets, like at a riverhead, where the saltwater people would bring fish and the bush people would come down and they might bring their sweet potatoes and stuff like that, and there would be a trade. And it was always funny to see one of these markets, because what would happen is the men would stand in the back, and the men from the back up in the bush would be sitting there with their axes or their knives or their spears, and they would be hunched down behind them, and their wives would be standing by these piles of sweet potato. And across the way, there would be women that had some fish on the ground or something like that, and their men would be standing back. And the men were always like furthest back, and the women. And by British law, the market couldn't start until a certain time. And I don't know what the time was, I don't know how it got measured, but all of a sudden, because when I'd be on tour, I'd be wanting to buy some bananas there, and you'd be sitting here in the market saying, I'm going to wait until it starts. And all of a sudden, at some signal, people just got up, walked across the way, took what the other people had, and were off in the bush. And like in 30 seconds, the market was over and gone, and everybody had left. And I'm still sitting here waiting to find some bananas, going like, what happened,
Oops.
Yeah, it just disappeared. So there was some interchange between the coastal people and the highland people from time to time, but it was very limited. It wasn't big.
Well, you had a certain expectation that of what you were going to be doing, what you were going to encounter as a worker there as a Peace Corps volunteer. Tell us a little bit about how that expectation was exceeded, or the difference, the contrariness of what you thought you might be doing, and how you were going to be living your life, and what the reality of it actually was.
Okay. Well, having known very little about the Solomons before I actually flew into Honiara, and then going through training, and having the Melanesians that worked for the Peace Corps, that were teaching our language to us, and we were taught Melanesian Pidgin, telling us about, man, I pity the guy that goes to Malaita, because these guys, I mean, they'll cut your throat for looking at them wrong, and they're just, they're just almost ready to explode with violence at any time and stuff like that. I was pretty nervous, it's like a test of my courage.
And obviously
to go there.
this wasn't a Malaitan telling you this.
No,
This was
is
another group.
these are guys from the other parts of the islands. So I was a little nervous when I went there. And so my job was basically to find all these villages and put them on a map so we could do a census on them. So started going out on tours, which were 3 weeks out of the month. I would go hiking with 2 assistants, Leslie and Sadias, 2 Melanesian guys, and the 3 of us would go hiking through the bush. Well, we'd hike for 12 hours a day. You'd go into this valley and you just go cruising through the valley, and every time you stumbled across one of these little hamlets, you would mark it on a map, and you just keep going. And when it got dark at night, you would sit back and say, okay, this is the last place we found. I don't think we can find another one. We'd ask them if we could stay there. Now, we would do this for 3 weeks, and I carried a change of clothes, a sheet to sleep in, my camera, and my notepaper. That's all I carried. Leslie and Sadias carried less than that.
Travel light, but travel right.
Yeah, we traveled very lightly. And always, when we got to one of these places, people would put us up. They'd say, oh, here's a house. Oh, okay, we'll get you some of our food. And they'd come over and they'd bring you food. They would feed the 3 of us. They would put us in a house to sleep every night. There was never a night that we had to sleep out. And then after dinner, all the men would come over and we'd be sitting down talking story half the night. It was like we were the television news, and we were the television entertainment shows.
Sure.
And so we'd stay up half the night talking story about what happened in the last village we were at, or up the coast, or what America was like, or all sorts of things. Now, a lot of these people, Leslie's, like I was telling you, Leslie's great uncle had been hung by the British as being the worst cannibal on Malaita. Sadias had been born in the time of cannibalism. Most of his family had eaten people when he was growing up. The bishop of Malaita at that time had been a cannibal before he became the bishop. I mean, this was not very far removed in time. But yet, these people were just extremely friendly, extremely hospitable, and really polite. And that was the biggest shocking thing that I had after what I had expected in training. And then you get over here and being kind of nervous and having these people just really looking out for you the whole time. And one of the things is, the only time I ever almost had any trouble in Malaita was in a bar one night when we're sitting around with a bunch of Malaitans, and they were talking about Australians and what bad guys Australians were. And I sat there, you know, they were talking about, well, Australians are all a bunch of criminals. How could you expect them to be any different? I said, well, where do you think Britain sent its criminals before they sent them to Australia? They sent them to America. Oh, the Melanesians got so upset. I was almost in trouble. I'm sitting here going, hey, I'm the only American at this table. Wait a minute here.
Well, it's quite an adventure. A lot of our viewers, I'm sure, would be interested to get a handle on what you believe was the benefit of your service in Malaita, in the Solomon Islands. Was it worth the American taxpayers' money to send you and other volunteers there, do you believe? And then the second part of the question, and just 4 or 5 minutes that we have left, is how did you translate your experience into your life back in the United States, back here in the United States?
Well, for me, it was definitely worth it, because it's something that's changed my life for 30 years after I've been there. I've never been the same as before I went. It would be hard to find a more pro-U.S. place because of World War II.
Sure.
All the Melanesians loved Americans when I was down there. So it wasn't like we were buying friendship by sending Peace Corps volunteers. We did help a lot of the development in the country. We did help them go towards independence. And we established a lot of strong relationships with the people. I think it was a plus for both sides. I think that the Peace Corps has the 3 goals, which I'm sure most people have heard about, which is, 1, that we're going to provide technical assistance to a foreign country. We did that. We had volunteers there that were helping in developing businesses, me with the census, some people working on water plants and stuff like that. We provided the technical assistance. 1 is for people, Americans, to learn about a different culture. And we did that because coming home, I can't view things the same way that I viewed them before I left, because I have a different perspective that I measure things against. It's a perspective from looking at those people that have what we would consider absolutely nothing, and yet are probably 100 times happier than a lot of our richest people in America. And it's hard to look at the world the same. But also, the third part is to give other people a view of Americans. So it's not something that you just hear other people talk about. You can say, I knew an American once. And we met a lot of people, and those people have, I met them over and over and over the course of the last 30 years as I go tromping back through their villages. And they're going, oh yeah, I remember you, Yeah. I remember what you stood for. I remember what you said. I remember what you thought. It's kind of fun.
Well, that's one of the values and benefits of Peace Corps service is just these things that you describe, especially the 3 mission statements of Peace Corps. And it sounds like that you accomplished that nicely. One of the missions of this program, Bring the World Home, is to provide a service to our community here in Hawaii. We've been able to, in fact, just recently recognized for an outstanding community service programming by the Lorette Miller Rupe Award for Community Service Programming. I think that your contribution today has, in the very brief conversation that we've had, can give our viewers an idea that even in what might be considered one of the most primitive cultures, there's still that connection to be made. You were back recently. You still found happy people looking forward to meeting you and greeting you?
I went back with my son. I took my son when he was 1.5 years, took him there, hiked through the jungles, took him back when he was 19. I found that they're becoming more westernized and there's more diversity, but basically the hospitality of the people is the same as it was. They've got more trials and tribulations than they did before, or different ones.
Mm-hmm. Well,
But yet they're
really,
still just as happy.
that's great. Thank you again, Jim.
It's
We
nice talking to
appreciate
you.
your visiting with us today. And viewers, please join us next time when we visit another country and bring the world home. Aloha.